So you're a historian by trade, and in graduate school you studied the parent movement and America's long and strained relationship with marijuana. So how did you get involved in studying digital engagement?
Well, I got my PhD from George Washington University, and when I was there, I was basically studying, I did my degree in American Studies, and for the most part I was focused on history, American history, particularly the history of social movements. So I started studying the history of the parent movement's impact on marijuana, and basically how they affected social justifications for the war on drugs and public policy. When I graduated in 2014, I knew I needed to stay in DC. I wanted to stay in DC because my husband had a career there and we both really enjoyed the city. So I was looking for alternatives to like the traditional academic pathway. And I knew that there were such things as the ACLS public fellowships. They're run by the American Council of Learned Societies, and they offer really interesting opportunities for alternative academic paths. So they place recent humanities PhDs in either nonprofit or governmental institutions for 2 years. They fund us, they give us health insurance, it's a really nice gig, and they have opportunities across the country. So you could be in Chicago or LA or all of these really wonderful places doing really interesting things. But I found one at the Center for Public Integrity, which is one of the country's oldest and largest nonprofit, nonpartisan newsrooms located in downtown DC. It was founded in 1989, and it's always done a lot of really intriguing work, particularly political reporting. And I really appreciated what they did and what they offered. This was both because I had been doing journalism prior to graduate school, and also because I kind of considered my dissertation like a book-length form of investigative journalism, and it was exciting to get back in. What the position was looking for was an engagement analyst, so someone who would be working with digital communities and trying to get more readers onto their work and trying to promote the center's purpose and sort of platform. And while that wasn't something that I had a lot of experience in, I was still really intrigued by it. So I applied, and I was very lucky, and I'm very grateful to say that I got it. And so I've been there for almost 2 years now. It'll be 2 years in July. And that's pretty much what got me from pot history to engagement analysis in 2 years.
So can you tell us a little bit about this new field of engagement analysis?
Sure. It's kind of a new field as far as journalism is concerned, and there are a wide variety of terms for it and titles for it. Engagement analyst and engagement analysis is what the center chose to call my position when they were kind of figuring it out and submitting that to the ACLS to apply for a fellow to come. But it's a term that I think has been used for probably about a decade as far as journalism is concerned. It also concerns the role of impact analysis. So you're trying to figure out what happens with the stories after they've been released and when they go out into the world and the effects that they have. But as an idea or as a concept, it's actually much older than that, right? It's basically drawn from the world of business theory, right? You want to market your idea, you want to market your product, you want to engage audiences or buyers or anyone with what it is that you're creating. This idea for a very long time was very controversial in the world of journalism because for so long there was always this very thick and impermeable wall between the business side and the newsroom, and they were never supposed to interact and never the twain shall meet. And what's been happening more recently, and I think that this is a really beneficial thing, a beneficial change, is that writers and journalists, as newsrooms shrink, as budgets go down, they've realized that they actually have to do a lot of that marketing and engagement themselves. You can't just put a story online and expect that it finds its readers on its own. There's too many other things constantly vying for a reader's attention. There's 1.5 million other things vying for the reader's attention. So just putting a story out there and expecting it to find a home is not going to work. So engagement analysts, or at least what I've been doing for the past couple of years, is trying to help those stories find their home after they've been published, but also to work with writers and editors from the beginning stages of even idea development while they're working in these sort of, the initial meetings. I have this one idea for a story, I think it would be really great. The engagement analyst ideally comes in and says, excellent, I like where you're going. These are the communities we can start talking to generate grassroots interest in it. This is the social media campaign we can do. This is how we can roll it out online. These are the other news organizations that might be interested in working with us. These are the activist groups that might be interested. So there's kind of an entire strategy and kind of incredible development plan that could go along with the story to ensure that the people who would be most interested in it or most affected by it do have the opportunity to then receive the work and interact with it, ideally, if all goes well.
Can you tell us about the methods that you use?
Yeah, when I started, the center hadn't been doing anything like this. When I arrived, I was kind of the first person to embark on this journey, and there are a lot of organizations and companies right now whose services you can purchase for like a monthly fee or something that will tell you how your stories are performing and who your readers are and things like that. And we looked into a lot of them, but they're really pricey, first of all. And also they don't necessarily give you the information that you might find most relevant for your newsroom. So one of the things that I did was I developed a tracking model where I just looked at information from analysis sources that we could get for free. So Google Analytics, Facebook Analytics, Twitter Analytics, and every story that we published, I would track for a week. And I would track how many people read it, what the bounce rate was, the social media performance, any comments, what the general gist of the comments were, things like that. We published infrequently enough that this was possible. I think for a huge newsroom, you would need more than one person doing this, and probably like a more specific, probably like a digital way to do it. But I was doing it on my own, and I really learned how our stories performed, not only within each subject realm, but also within each sort of level of story, right? So we developed 6 levels of stories, and story level 1 would be something very basic, like a blog post, which would perform very differently from a level 6 story, which is our highest level, which would be a very huge undertaking. It would have usually a video component, multimedia aspect, an interactive component. The story would be longer. It would have something really gripping about it. And so naturally, stories between levels 1 and 6 would perform very differently, but we never quite understood how or why. So after tracking these things for about 6 months, I started generating benchmarks of how stories performed, and that gave us a level of kind of understanding and quantifying what success was. If we had this benchmark, if we had this average, if a story performed better than that, fantastic, we could start to understand why. And if a story didn't perform as well, that's also incredibly useful information. Why didn't it perform as well? Well, was it released over the holidays and no one's paying attention? Was the social media campaign insufficient? Things like that. So that gave us kind of our jumping off point to begin analysis and to begin figuring out how to really strategize our social media and our engagement campaign. After that, last year I did a pretty broad-based reader survey. So I got about 200 people to respond, which was great. They read 1 of 4 of our stories, and then they answered, I think, about 27 questions. I asked a lot of them, but they did it, which was great. So thank you if you responded to my survey. We asked them primarily about their thoughts on investigative journalism, which news sources they found the most trustworthy and interesting, and how they use social media to interact with the news. There are a lot of responses that they gave us, but suffice to say, social media is an incredibly important way that people interact with the news. And sharing stories and reading stories that people have shared really makes up a lot of people's news feeds. When you share a story, it's kind of good to know that people really are paying attention to that. And the kinds of stories that get shared are also very indicative of readers' values and perspectives on the world. So we started learning a lot about that, and we're now in the process of applying those findings to our own strategy and figuring out where we're going to go from there.
So what advice would you give for building digital communities?
I think the biggest piece of advice that I could give would be actually being able to define success first, which is hard to do. When you're going into launching an engagement strategy, until you kind of know what it is that you're looking for, it's really difficult to do. Every newsroom is looking for something else, something new, something unique. Are you looking simply for page views? Are you looking to lower your bounce rate? Are you looking for a really active social media presence where readers are constantly interacting with your work and talking to you and discussing the story amongst themselves? Are you looking for real world impact? The center does a lot of political work, so we keep track of things like how many times we're mentioned in the congressional record, or if politicians cite us, or if we're able to bring down corrupt politicians and things like that. Those are really measurable markers of impact and engagement and success, but you have to figure out what your own newsroom is seeking to do. If you're kind of getting off the ground and you just want eyeballs, you need to figure out how to get page views. If you're looking for, it doesn't really matter. Like you kind of have to figure it out on your own. Without that initial definition of success, it is impossible to figure out how to achieve it. So again, having engagement analysts strategizing along with writers and reporters and editors in the very beginning stages, understanding how your stories are currently performing and figuring out what those benchmarks are, getting an understanding of your current audience, what they expect of you, what they want from you, how they view the news, how they view your current social media presence. All of those things will start to influence that definition of success that you can then use to really expand and enlarge your digital community and hopefully, be awesome.
So what are you working on next?
My next project is my book, actually. I sold the expanded dissertation to Basic Books, so now it's the history of all marijuana activism from the 1960s to today, both pro and con. That's going to be released in fall of 2017. My first child arrives in September, so those are my two big things.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.